Mustafa, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's talk about Bill 21. It's the law that bans people, teachers, police officers from wearing their headscarves, their kippas, their turbans while working. And I understand NCCM has been at the forefront of the legal battle.
Right. We, alongside the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, have been fighting this from day one. 24 hours after the law passed, we filed our first attempt to stay the bill, and now we're working to have the bill struck in its entirety.
So why did you pursue legal avenues in the beginning?
Well, we didn't just pursue legal avenues in the beginning. Before it passed, we were working very hard politically to try to make sure that this bill wasn't passed. We tried to engage Quebeckers, we tried to engage members of the National Assembly. Let me tell you this, they didn't want to hear us. When they did their hearings on the bill itself, only 2 of the almost 30 groups that were invited belonged to racialized communities. This was stacked against members of the Muslim, Jewish, Sikh communities from day one. In the same way, and I think it's important for Canadians and people in North America to understand this. A lot of us look to the situation in France right now and the deployments of laïcité to target racialized minorities, and specifically the Muslim community. What's going on right now, Bill 21, is called the Laïcité Act. This is an attempt to bring a similar approach in Canada. And for many of us, it's hard to understand. But the reality is that today, 2020, it is illegal for somebody who wears hijab, somebody who wears a topi, somebody who wears a turban, somebody who wears a kippah, to become a teacher, to become a prosecutor, to become a police officer.
So you're on the ground talking to people. How are people responding, people in Quebec? Have you seen some of the effects of this legislation on them?
It's been devastating for many people. You can hear their stories if you go and type online. You can hear about people like Amrit Kaur, a young Sikh woman who was forced to leave the province where she's grown up her entire life so that she could teach. You can hear from people like Ishraq Nur al-Haq, the plaintiff in our case, an incredibly brave young Muslim woman who stood up to say, this isn't fair, this isn't right. The reality is that every single Canadian Muslim, but not just every single Canadian Muslim, every single Canadian who believes in this question of freedom, who believes that it's the content of your character, not what you look like, that should circumscribe your dreams. That's the major question that we're fighting. And it's absolutely critical that every single Canadian raises their voice on this question. We've been fighting this. We at NCCM, we forced this to become an election issue in 2019. We worked very hard to pass motions from coast to coast condemning Bill 21. Now we're back in court yet again, and we're going to need your help to get this over the finish line.
Why do you think political leaders haven't really come forward, and supported these religious minorities?
So some political leaders have spoken up, and I think we need to give credit where credit is due. So the Prime Minister, for example, has said that he's condemned Bill 21, and he hasn't ruled out intervening in our court case, but he hasn't done a whole lot more than that. Jagmeet Singh has taken a roughly similar kind of line without saying that he might intervene. The leader of Canada's opposition, Aaron O'Toole, has said that he's personally opposed to Bill 21. But the reality is that this has to go beyond condemnation. We need to see clear action from all of our political leaders, and that action cannot be sacrificed at the altar of political expediency because it might, hurt the perception of your party in Quebec.
Well, I guess because Quebec has always had this special status in Canada where, they've always felt kind of aggrieved with relation to the federal government. So there's a fear of kind of exacerbating that sentiment.
Right, and we believe very strongly, NCCM was born in Quebec. We strongly believe that a Quebec identity has to belong to Quebeckers. And that can't mean that some Quebeckers are marginalized and excluded from what that means. That's simply not acceptable. And so we strongly believe that if we want to preserve what makes La Belle Province beautiful, we must protect the members of its communities.
So how do you fight this legally? Because Quebec has used the notwithstanding clause, Section 33, and that, makes it difficult to launch a charter challenge because, freedom of expression, freedom of religion is, within the charter, and the notwithstanding clause kind of allows them to override that for 5 years.
So, there's a number of ways that we're making this
I've seen some creative approaches.
We're making a number of arguments on the basis of that it's vague, it's unclear what the extent of this actually looks like. We made arguments based on the architecture of the Constitution, that if we look at the way that our Constitution was set up, nobody would argue that before the Charter came in the 80s, that religious freedom didn't exist. So we contend that things like treating citizens alike, the rule of law, that's something that's baked into the architecture of our Constitution. And that's something we think that the notwithstanding clause simply doesn't extend all the way to. And we're making a number of other kinds of arguments. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the courts to decide whether they accept our arguments. We think we put forward some good arguments, and we've obviously been joined in this round by some other folks as well, in addition to just NCCM and CCLA. Section 28 around gender equality, those are things that I
saw that too,
those are things that we've been looking at and focused on. But it's really critical that this is not just something that remains in the hands of the courts. This really does remain in the hands of ordinary Canadians and ordinary Quebeckers. Ultimately, this is something that shouldn't just be something that we're fighting in courts. Every single day, this should be headline news as to the way in which racialized minorities, Muslims, Sikhs, Jews, are being systematically denied opportunities in Quebec.
The problem is that public polls show that the majority of Quebecers support this legislation. And it almost seems like the two sides are polarized. It's like there's almost no way to communicate with each other and bridge the gaps between them.
Right. I will note that while the bill initially enjoyed significant support, its support has declined.
Okay.
So while initially it was in the sort of mid-70s, which is an incredibly popular piece of legislation, it's now declined to around 49%.
Okay.
Now, does that not mean it's still very popular? 49% of anybody supporting anything is still an incredible number of people. But what that means is that the thesis that we suggested, that as Quebeckers learned about the impact of this bill, that its popularity would diminish, is true. At the end of the day, most people are good people. Most people don't want to see other people arbitrarily denied opportunities in life, because the Legault government has very much proposed that this is about neutrality. And what we've been arguing is that a neutral state doesn't discriminate. And as more and more...
That rhymes, a neutral state doesn't discriminate.
Also rhymes. But what we're suggesting and what we think is really critical that folks remember as we go forward is that ultimately it's in your hands. Do you want a Canada for your grandchildren where in one province, because they wear a kippah, a turban, a hijab, they're not allowed opportunities that other Canadians are allowed? That's a decision that each and every Canadian has to decide. And when you talk to your elected officials, when you talk to your city councillors, when you talk at every level, that consternation has to be expressed.
Are you hopeful that this law will be overturned at some point?
We're working very hard to make that happen, inshallah. Ultimately, we're in the hands of the courts in terms of the actual overturning of the law. But I believe, as Dr. King famously said, that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think that if we work very hard and we all stand together, inshallah, we'll get to a situation where that's the case.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much for joining me, Mustafa.
Thank you so much for having us.
If you enjoyed this video, click like and subscribe. And please donate to support our work at QuranSpeaks.com.